When will we begin colonizing Mars? Many space enthusiasts, and not only have had this question. We send people and stations into space. With the help of telescopes, we scan the visible universe. We have entered the surface of the moon. When will we be able to enter the surface of the red planet? The answer to this question knows exactly Elon Musk. He claims that by 2040, his company SpaceX will be able to build an entire colony of people on Mars with the help of the latest Starship rockets. And knowing the ambition and persistence of this man, it is safe to say that it will be so. And how it will happen, you are going to see in today's video. So, first, we need to understand exactly why Starship will help us colonize Mars. It's the biggest, most powerful, and first fully reusable rocket. Here's the most important thing to know about it. The rocket is 120 meters tall and consists of two parts. The first stage is a super heavy booster with 33 methane engines. That's a record number for any rocket ever built. Now let's take NASA's newest SLS for comparison. The cost of the rocket is $2.2 billion to build the SLS itself, $568 million for ground systems, $1 billion for the Orion spacecraft, and $300 million to the European Space Agency for the Orion Service Module. What's striking about these costs is that they don't include the tens of billions of dollars NASA has already spent on developing the Orion spacecraft since 2005 and the Space Launch System rocket since 2011. The total cost of $4.1 billion per mission is awfully expensive, don't you think? Whereas a single Starship launch is estimated to cost $20 million. Also, in terms of payloads, Elon Musk's rocket leads the way. SLS can put 95 tons into orbit, and Starship all 150 tons, which is an absolute record. Interesting fact, the weight of the ISS is 420 tons, and in order for SLS was able to deliver such a mass into orbit, we'll need 5 launches and more than $20 billion. In the case of Starship, the numbers would be different. 3 launches and attention, only $60 million. Another significant plus, which we talked about earlier, is reusability. If SLS, when going into space, 90% of its size is simply thrown away to burn up in the atmosphere, then Starship appears to us as a fully ready reusable system, which reduces its cost. There are still a limitless number of advantages of Starship, but let's move on to how they want to use it and how the colonization of Mars will generally look like. So, Mars approaches the Earth at a minimum distance once every 2 years. Obviously, this position of the planets is the most convenient and favorable for a flight between them. The closest such moment will occur in the summer of 2025. Then, it is planned to launch 2 unmanned cargo rockets to the Red Planet. They will be on the road for several months to a year and will have to deliver about 100 tons of cargo to the surface of Mars. Power plants, mining equipment, robotic machinery, and more. The main task of this phase will be to explore the terrain, search for water ice, and prepare infrastructure for future colonists. The remotely operated vehicles will have to prepare everything necessary for the safe landing of manned ships, such as clearing the terrain of obstructing debris and conducting geological reconnaissance of the area to find ice, which is critical for the survival of the colonists and the development of the settlement. After all, water is not only a vital substance for any biological life, but also a raw material for the electrolysis reaction, which can be used to produce oxygen and hydrogen. The first is necessary for breathing and fuel combustion, and the second, in combination with carbon dioxide, can be converted into methane, which will serve as fuel for rockets. The next stage of the Martian expedition is scheduled for 2027. It is then that Mars will once again approach the Earth at a minimum distance of about 57 million kilometers. A total of 4 launches are planned, 2 cargo and 2 with astronauts on board. The ships will spend several months on the road and reach their destination next year. Soon after the distance from the Earth, it will be impossible to catch up with them, and in case of an emergency, the colonists will have to rely only on their own forces. Several months of interplanetary travel is no easy task. Before the designers of manned ships are complex and important tasks, because it is necessary not only to maximize the use of available space module, but also to make the journey comfortable and safe. The expected number of crew will be several dozen people. For them, there will be both individual cabins and common areas, as well as gymnasiums to prevent unwanted changes in the body caused by a long stay in weightlessness. In addition, a significant amount of the ship's interior space will be allocated for storage, various equipment, and life support systems. An important point in the interplanetary flight is protection from radiation. Since most of the flight the rocket will be directed nose from the sun, it is planned to locate the living compartments in the front of the ship. Thus, the storage and other compartments of the ship, not intended for the permanent presence of people, will serve as a shield for the crew, detaining and absorbing a significant part of the destructive solar radiation. The main task of the conquerors of the Red Planet should be the organization of the Martian base, suitable for long-term residence, including plant cultivation and setting up equipment for the production of oxygen and rocket fuel. It sounds fantastic, but Elon Musk confidently states that by the end of the next decade, he intends to establish a full-fledged colony on Mars, capable not only of autonomous existence for a long time, but also of successful development. However, the alien settlement may encounter unexpected difficulties. An example of this is the Biosphere 2 project, which was to maintain a balanced biological system under a sealed dome for several years. This experiment showed that creating a closed ecosystem is an extremely labor-intensive process with many problems. The ecosystem created by the project failed to fulfill its objectives. It failed to provide the settlers with either oxygen or enough food. Another danger is cosmic radiation. Mars does not have a magnetic field that protects the surface from cosmic rays, so the design of the base must include radiation shielding. But even with it, radiation poses a notable threat to Mars conquerors. It can lead to intoxication and general weakening of the settlers' bodies, as well as an increased chance of infection. Another challenge may be the psychological compatibility of the colonists. That conflicts inevitably erupt in a closed community is a well-studied phenomenon in psychology. It is known as the Polaris effect, is the increased irritability of members from a closed group. Conflicts can erupt literally on an empty place, with serious consequences up to fights and bodily harm. One can only hope that this unpleasant phenomenon will be managed. So we've dealt with these problems. What's next? The year is 2030. With the landing of the second group of settlers, humans now outnumber robots as the majority of the population keeps arriving. The first part of the team are investors. The rest of the team are scientists, engineers, and nerdy farmers. Construction begins on a permanent greenhouse dome, increasing the number of plants grown on Mars. The settlers grow the first Martian lettuce. A small portion of the food now comes from local produce. This gradually reduces the amount of food that must be transported from Earth on future missions. Construction begins on specialized refueling stations for spacecraft on Mars, and engineers begin work on the first 3D printed habitat that uses a 3D printer and artificial intelligence. A mixture of Martian soil and lab-grown plants are used as the glue, or polymer, holding the material together. The 3D printed outer dome of the new habitat provides protection from radiation, while an inflatable inner shell is added for extra safety. Parts of one of the spacecraft are disassembled to create communication and life support systems for the new 3D printed habitat. As new, more advanced 3D printing robots arrive on Mars, large hydroponic plants are built to grow crops. Settlers are beginning to try underground excavation in an effort to create a habitat and better shelter from radiation on the Red Planet. There are already more than 300 settlers living and working on Mars. Space agencies from around the world are now sending their equipment and scientists to Mars. A new spacecraft crew brought fish from Earth to create aquaponics, a closed system with fish and plants, since Mars now produces enough water. 5 years later, in 2035, the colony will begin to develop even more, because that year will be known as the year of the Great Migration from Earth to Mars. It is at this time that humanity will observe the next great opposition of Mars as it comes as close to Earth as possible. Travel time to the Red Planet has been shortened to 5 months. Hundreds of new settlers are waiting for a moment to step into new lands, and autonomous industrial-scale 3D printers are now being used to grow the base. The international habitat expands to become a city-sized settlement of interconnected domes. Construction begins on the first Martian hospital, and more people decide to stay on Mars as more facilities are built. The settler colony already numbers over 1,500 people. There are even small TV shows set on the Red Planet. Another exploratory mission opens a cave, and there is a constant search for places for new developments and habitats, including an underground one. By 2040, the Red Planet has a population of over 5,000 people. The drilling company's tunnel digger lands on Mars and begins testing. It digs underground tunnels for shielded passageways and underground habitat construction. These events mark the beginning of the robotic bases of huge corporations on Mars, which are now present in various locations further away from the main base. They serve to extract minerals and also begin to build smaller habitats away from the base. The first human was born on the Red Planet. Researchers and medics closely monitor the health of mother and child. A large number of new arrivals are now paying for a 2-year stay on a commercial basis. In this way, all travelers contribute to Martian society. The first Martian political system is being established. Local politics are needed to help manage the resident Mars community and to help advance the mission of existence. The question of self-sufficiency is raised as a matter of colony survival. The first restaurant on Mars opens, serving the first bioprinted food, including Martian meat. By 2045, the settler population reaches the 30,000 mark. The first bioprinter used in hospitals arrives to first test and then begin printing human organs under Mars conditions. A special maternity ward was opened in the hospital to cope with the increased birth rate of Mars inhabitants. Construction has begun on the first parts of a fusion power plant, which will reduce the need for additional solar power from the panels. The year 2045 will be the year of the Martian explorers. The first human climbs the highest mountain and volcano in the solar system, Olympus. It is almost 3 times taller than Everest. The first mRNA plant is also put into operation, allowing people living on Mars to be inoculated before they return to Earth. The first schools are built as people working on Mars begin to move their families here. And now, 2050, there are more than 150,000 people living on the Red Planet. The first fully autonomous orbital production station arrives in Mars orbit. The space station processes asteroids to produce rare materials. This is done in space so that the atmosphere of Mars is not contaminated with industrial waste. The finished products are then sent to the Martian surface. Factories are open to recycle solar panels, batteries, and assemble open and enclosed electric vehicles, as well as maintain ATVs and other vehicles. The first human born on Mars visits Earth. He is aided by a special robotic suit controlled by a neural network that helps him withstand Earth's unusually heavy gravity. Woody plants are already thriving on Martian grasslands in huge enclosed greenhouse domes built near the equator. Human technology is producing oxygen that penetrates the Martian atmosphere. This will be the beginning of a new era, and hundreds of years from now. One day, locals will see the first tufts of grass in the wild on the surface of Mars. These are escaped seedlings from greenhouses trying to survive on the Red Planet's new surface. This is the kind of future that writers and dreamers envision for themselves. And what kind of future do you see? Write about it in the comments, as well as subscribe to the channel and like this video. We also suggest you to watch our videos about how Starship will change the whole space industry and what NASA is really hiding on Mars.